So, welcome to another edition of Fireside Chats. And I am joined today by Tina Joshi, who is on the faculty at the University of Plymouth, where her focus is in medical molecular microbiology. And I got to know Tina, became aware of her work because of a video that she's been doing about educating lay people and young people about antimicrobial resistance. So, welcome, Tina. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start a little bit by talking a bit about you and your background. I mean, as when I met you because of your deep interest in antimicrobial resistance, but I really don't know how it is that you got here. What's the backstory?
Oh, well, I did a degree in microbiology, and actually it was when I started my PhD research into developing diagnostics for bacteria and pathogens that I really got into AMR. So my PhD was on C. difficile, a huge problem in the US, Clostridioides difficile infection, and developing a diagnostic assay that was handheld for that particular pathogen. And for me, that introduced me to a whole world of diagnostics and interdisciplinary work. So looking at engineering, biophysics, and microbiology. Mm-hmm. And that's when my passion for AMR just came alive, because I realized that this technology could be adapted. So we adapted it for multiple pathogens, MRSA, Bacillus anthracis, so it had a biodefense angle. And that's where I am today now, because that research really almost catapulted my career. Then I did postdoctoral research associate positions in that area. And then when I came to Plymouth and got my permanent lectureship, which I believe Americans call tenure. Yes, what Americans call tenure. I had my position at Plymouth. I established my own research group in diagnostics, but at the same time, I also looked at IPC, infection prevention and control.
Wow. The diagnostics angle has been one that has been surprisingly difficult to implement, I have to say, because it feels like we, in some ways, inventing the tools. It's possible to make new tools. The real issue is making them usable and accessible. So you worked on a handheld diagnostic device for C. diff?
Yeah, for C. diff, that's exactly it. The technology is wonderful. I managed to readapt it now in my current position. But what's great about it is the idea that you can be able to detect a pathogen or AMR resistance genes at the bedside of a patient within 10 minutes, looking at the right technology and using the right types of collaborators. So you can't work in silos in science. You know, I'm not the be all and end all of all knowledge. I'm not the fountain of knowledge. So that's why we collaborate. And that's the beauty of it. So through collaboration, we're managing to get this diagnostics done. But I do agree. I really think that diagnostics has just fallen off the AMR agenda. And I'm quite passionate about that, because I feel like there's almost, it's almost been lost. You know, everyone knows of the O'Neill report, definitely in the UK, where Jim O'Neill, who's Lord Jim O'Neill, said that by 2050 there'll be 10 million people per year who would die of AMR, trillion in lost output, $1 trillion or pounds in lost output. And one of the main solutions on management of AMR is development of diagnostics, and no one seems to be talking about it, and there's very little incentivization for development of diagnostics. And me being an expert in the area and working on it, I really wonder why, because it's the most appropriate way, in my opinion, of enabling stewardship.
Yeah, the companies I've interacted with over diagnostics have struggled with the extent of the laboratory facilities, or the problem of creating an established base. There's a problem of scale with getting diagnostics out there. I think I have been encouraged by seeing the recent workshops. FDA CDC had a pretty good sized workshop on this recently. And certainly there is the IMI project that's focused on developing new diagnostics. We'll stick the links to those below. And so and I've actually thought sometimes that diagnostics are about 10 times harder than new drugs. I mean, because not only you have to invent the test, but you have to be able to make it at scale and then deliver it at scale. It's actually quite a difficult thing to do. And interesting that you've spent some time working on that. I got to know you because of you reached out to me about the movie you were making that was to educate the lay public and educate young people. How did you get into doing that? I'm just curious as to where that came from.
I love talking to people, which sounds really crazy, but I do. I love talking to people about science, and trying to relay what I do in an easy kind of format. And I became quite good at it. So I did it from when I was doing my PhD, a lot of public engagement. And definitely when it came to this movie, I've done a lot of engagement in the past. I've tried to talk to people about AMR, got really involved in policy. In the UK, I am on the Council of the Microbiology Society, and I lead their Impact and Influence Committee. So I'm still really involved in all of this. But what struck me the most was when you think about Greta Thunberg and how she's managed to get people incentivized about understanding climate change and doing something about it. And that's just not Greta Thunberg. It's several different means of public engagement that have made people realise they can do something. It made me wonder why no one was doing it for AMR. And it made me try to understand why the public weren't really identifying with AMR. People identify with climate change. People don't identify with AMR. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video. I wanted to be able to try and get people to understand the basics of how to, reduce infection, wash their hands, perform appropriate infection prevention and control, just generally day to day. And that's what this was all about. Just a little bit of education for 10 to 11-year-olds and families to bring them in to the idea that this is actually a really serious problem without causing any fear about it, because it is quite a scary prospect that our antibiotics may not work properly anymore.
So in that work that you've done there, are there some sort of core ideas that you think are worth implementing or changing the way that we talk? And I guess here I'm thinking about the work that Wellcome Trust did to look at different ways of using language. There have been a modest number of explorations of how to use language, not as many as I might have thought we'd have by now. So what themes did you get out of that exploration?
Well, I think it's really important that we do use, a universal language for AMR. Drug-resistant infection seems to be the easiest term that people understand, the public understand. When you start saying antimicrobial resistance, a lot of people find that to be a bit of a mouthful, and they don't understand what it means. And we know it's an umbrella term for drug-resistant infections. So that was the first thing. And secondly, trying to embed that understanding in the younger generation. I'm talking about at school level, 10 to 11-year-olds, and making sure that they understand that this is a problem that's going to affect them in later life. And maybe actually, and one of the reasons I do this is because these are going to be our scientists of the future. These are going to be our medics of the future, and we want to get them to be able to start getting interested in it from now, to be able to provide the next set of solutions. I would say actually with AMR, I don't think we're at the solution stage anymore. And that sounds really, really strong considering this is an AMR solutions program. I think we're at the stage where we're going to have to start managing it. The solution is management and appropriate management.
Yeah, we're talking here about building an ecosystem, actually. That's a conversation that we have fairly frequently about where the next generation of scientists going to come from, how long it takes to train them. And we have, frightfully few places for people to really learn the art of approaching the challenges of antimicrobial resistance. And if you think you want to have a steady stream of new therapies and a steady stream of interesting diagnostics, you've actually got to train the people who are going to do that work. And it takes a whole collection of folks to make that happen. I seem to recall that you told me you about some of your public outreach work, and that you did some stuff in the COVID arena in terms of being a spokesperson around COVID. Tell me a little bit more about what you did at that time.
Yes, certainly. So, of course, I work on infection prevention and control. So really briefly, I look at biocide resistance in bacteria and co-resistance with antibiotics. And that the kind of premise of that really is hygiene and understanding the spread and transmission of infections. So in the local area, which is southwest of the UK, I was asked by the local BBC News to contribute to people's understanding of COVID. Every day in the UK, we were getting messages from our local government and actually national government, and we used to have bulletins and announcements being given, and the public just didn't seem to understand what they meant. So I kind of put an easy kind of terminology on it. And when I was doing my COVID outreach and engagement on TV, and it was often live TV, I was trying to explain what our Prime Minister at that time, Boris Johnson, was saying, what the Chief Medical Officer was saying, and how we could start implementing those things at home. So the core concepts there were, social distancing, hand washing. Over time, it got to ventilation, and over time, it got to use of face masks. But at the beginning, it was a case of trying to alleviate people's fear surrounding COVID and trying to get them to be empowered and enabled to be able to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to say anything good about the COVID virus at all, but sometimes you do find a silver lining inside that proverbial sow's ear. And do you think that COVID has helped people understand antimicrobial resistance?
I think it's actually helped people understand that infections can be airborne. I think that's really important. Yeah. And I think they can understand they need to wash their hands, they need to stop the transmission of infections. But actually, and controversially probably, I don't think that the public understand it in the context of AMR or vice versa. And I don't think it's enabled that narrative, and partly because of all the misinformation that we see on social media and the platforms given to people who are spreading that misinformation. So that, I think, actually is really important to highlight, because as an expert and as a scientist, you're trying to battle that narrative too. You're trying to give the right information to people. Yeah. It's very difficult with that type of backlash, and especially with the vaccine. So if you say to people, we're going to develop vaccines for AMR, a range of AMR pathogens, we all know that vaccine hesitancy has become a very big thing. And I just think with COVID, it's just exacerbated to a point where actually, for us as scientists, I don't think we really understand how serious it is for the public. And I think this misinformation needs to be stopped somehow. And we need to start looking at a new way of PR to try and get people to understand AMR and our solutions and vaccines and how to prevent infections better. And I'll give you another example of this. I mean, if I talk about AMR, or last week it was World Antibiotic Awareness Week, right, and I'd asked the local news to come and talk to us about AMR because it's a serious issue. And the general response was the public don't seem to want to know about infections anymore because COVID has given people almost a sense of having enough. They don't really want to hear it anymore. Yeah. And that's sad, because where does that leave us with AMR? And I wonder about that a lot. We've got work to do.
Yeah, it's unfortunate to get that sense that COVID has worn us all out, but it certainly has indeed in many ways worn us all out. And I think that this whole bit about the missing the scientific basis of what's going on here, and people not getting trained in it, is really a deep issue that you can only get people to understand stuff if they've got even just a little bit of background. And I'm afraid we don't have that. A news article I read recently said that at this point, at least in the United States, essentially all of the people who die of COVID had a preventable death at this point. And it really makes you sad that misinformation causes people to commit what turns out to be a fatal error. I mean, that's extraordinary to think about, the idea that you make a fatal mistake because somebody else is feeding you a lie. So let's come back a little bit to you and your current scientific activities. What's going on in the Joshi lab right now?
Oh, my lab's so exciting and I love it. I've got 3 PhDs in there and they're all doing different projects. So I've got 2 on diagnostics for UTIs. So developing a handheld diagnostic for UTIs, utilising microwave energy. So it's definitely very interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary, my lab is. And it's fantastic because we're just utilising new technology and seeing its boundaries and how far it can go and how much we can innovate. And that's what our lab's about. So we're doing that bit of work there, and we're working with companies on that too. So we've got a lot of industrial partners. And then the next set of work that I'm doing is C. diff, resistance to bleach. And it was this project I've been doing for a long, long time, just trying to see how C. diff tolerates being disinfected. And it's become a bit of a beast now because we do know that C. diff definitely from lab-based experiments can survive multiple generations of exposure to really strong bleach. Yeah. And that's frightening for me because if you can't kill a spore, You want to kill a spore,
Yeah.
and bleach is basically the thing that does it. And we're doing tests with things like UV and seeing whether UV tolerance occurs, and we're seeing elements of UV tolerance in C. diff. So it's really interesting. Yeah, we're seeing that. And there's definitely papers showing genetic variations as well, and mutations that have led to that too. So, yeah.
What in the world enables an organism to protect its DNA well enough to be UV tolerant?
This is it though, isn't it? I mean, the way in which the spore structure is, I mean, I could go into super details, but I don't want to bore everybody. The spore structure is so strong with the calcium outside of it. And one of the reasons I've studied C. diff for such a long time is because it's so unique in terms of its plasticity and the way in which it works. I'll give you another example with C. diff, and it would kind of hopefully explain how C. diff mutates. We now know there's plasmid-mediated metronidazole resistance in C. diff. We know that. Scientists now think in the area that there's vancomycin and resistance is mediated via plasmid too. Now, that comes again. People think that C. diff was so 2010. It was a long time ago and it was irrelevant. Now that's coming back. And the fact that this resistance is there means that I think C. diff is going to come back with a vengeance, and we're going to see more C. diff cases rising globally. And for me, in terms of the scientific side of it, I find it incredibly interesting that it does mutate so well. But also for the laboratory perspective, I want to see if we can eradicate it from nosocomial environments, so from healthcare environments. And that's what this research is about. Also looking at the way in which antibiotics interact, not only with C. diff, but with the whole range of escape pathogens as well. So your standard Klebsiellas, Pseudomonas, E. coli's. And what we're trying to do there is understand the tolerance of antibiotics and biocides together in these particular bacteria. So it's a whole range of research going on. It's all IPC related. But I think this is incredibly important moving forward, because what C. diff has taught me is, these microorganisms evolve so quickly, not just to antibiotics, but also to disinfectants. So we need to be careful about how we're using disinfection. That can't be the only solution to preventing AMR. So we need to start thinking of multiple solutions to kind of prevent infection transfer and spread of infections, not just disinfection and not just developing new antimicrobials. And the arms race isn't just antibiotics, it's disinfectants too, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and disinfectants, and then the larger challenge of just doing the simple stuff, clean food, clean water, and the core set of vaccines that we know really work tremendously well to prevent, I'll call it the broad category of childhood diseases. Though when you get older, you start getting your vaccine for the pneumococcus as well. So it's not just young people that get their vaccines. So it's absolutely fascinating what you said about C. diff and its tolerance to the standard things we use for cleaning. You said there were 3 things in your lab. What's the third topic area where you work?
Yes, certainly. So this is escape pathogens, things like E. coli, Pseudomonas, and definitely Klebsiella species that we've got in the lab. And what we're looking at there is how they respond to biocides, so the disinfectant chemicals we use to treat them, and see if any of that resistance and tolerance to biocide, which we are seeing in our lab, is potentiated through by antibiotics as well. So where there's antibiotic and biocide co-resistance happening. That's incredibly important when you think about infection prevention and control, because one of the pillars of AMR management is ensuring that we don't spread any infection. So the way in which we actually utilize disinfectants need to be looked at in future to make sure we're not overusing disinfectants as well as antibiotics.
Yeah, that's disturbing. I often joke that it's easy to kill bacteria with steam and fire and bleach. And what you're telling me now is, well, the steam and the fire probably still work, but not so sure about the bleach or the quaternary ammonia products. Yeah, unfortunately, that is frightening to think about that level of resistance developing. Well, if you connect your C. diff work and your work on environmental biocides, certainly all connects back into the notion of, I would say public health, which sounds to me like a theme that has run through a lot of your work. You're interested in getting people to understand the problem and then actually to do something about it. And so in your COVID-related and AMR-related conversations, any themes about, let's say, the broader topic of, personal and public infection prevention and control, personal and public hygiene measures? Anything there that's noteworthy that comes out of your insights?
Certainly. So the first one certainly is hand washing, and people find it really strange that something so simple can be so effective in prevention of infections. So that's the first thing. The second thing, of course, is the amount of effluent and definitely sewage that's pumped into our UK oceans right now. So one of the big things that's happening in the UK is that our water companies are releasing raw sewage into the environment. Now, anyone who understands AMR will understand that this just potentiates horizontal gene transfer, the potential for AMR infections to transmit to people. There's a lot of people in the UK who swim in our seas who are getting sick from these infections. And there's just no kind of wider impetus to stop this from happening. So for me and for the public right now, this is a major problem in the UK.
Yeah, the notion that bacteria are something that anybody can encounter, the wrong time and place. You occasionally bump into people who think that, well, if they've never personally used an antibiotic, they must be okay because they won't be immune to the antibiotic. And a failure to understand that the fact that it has nothing to do with your personal history, and but the last glass of water you drank could actually be the place where you get into trouble. Yeah. If you've got a pretty good broad view on, like I could say, local and national efforts in the UK to address the issues of antimicrobial resistance, and it's a big topic, but what are things that you think are underrepresented in our current work that you'd like to see being done differently? If you could push the levers, where would you push?
Oh, certainly, and this is not an individualistic thing. It's certainly diagnostics. I really think there should be a push there, but I'm very aware of the valley of death. I work in the area, and it's very difficult to develop a diagnostic. But I think we need to at least try to help our clinicians prescribe better, and that's really important. So, from a scientific perspective, I think that really needs to be incentivized. Of course, discovery of new antibiotics is also important, but I always wonder, how many more antibiotics are we going to need? We're going to have to keep finding new ones consistently with the arms race with these bacteria. So while it's important, we all know it costs over $1 billion to get an antibiotic from lab to market. And most of the companies have done that. As you well know, you're the expert. I mean, Archaeogen, for example, have just gone under. So what do we do to make sure that we fix this broken economic market for antibiotics? And for me, I just think it's so sad that this is happening. And that's one of the reasons why I do the public engagement. I do the public engagement because if you incentivize the public, if you make them believe and understand that this is a huge problem that will affect them, if they understand that they may not be able to have cancer treatment in future because the antibiotics may not work, then that's the only way we can change policy at a local level, a national level, and then at the higher levels internationally. And I think it's public power, people power that we need. And I think that's severely underrepresented. We've got a problem connecting with the public regarding AMR. So for me, I would like to see that. I would like to see people saying, let's just stop here. I'd like to see celebrities saying, stop, actually, this is really important. I want you to know about it. The other day, I saw an article, the top article on BBC News was Leonardo DiCaprio talking about bisons being born in Canterbury in the UK. I thought, well, that's wonderful. He's talking about climate change consistently, but why is nobody at that level talking about AMR? I can't understand it.
It has been remarkably difficult to get high-level public advocacy about AMR. And Dame Sally did us all a huge favor by her very steadfast and clear commentary on AMR. But when I watched, the Infectious Diseases Society of America, for example, try to put together stories about AMR, they do have a series. There's a really fascinating webpage, Faces of Antimicrobial Resistance. There are multiple patient stories on that. But somehow it has just not been possible to sort of push that to the forefront of the debate. And I guess, one of the things I had sort of maybe perhaps naively thought that COVID would do was help people understand, the importance of that kind of a therapy when you get into trouble. And it's not, I say again, I don't want to say anything good about COVID, but if I will take advantage of what we can in order to use it as a teachable moment. The fact that antibiotics are, just such a profoundly, extraordinarily life-saving therapy, and that if you run out of them, takes a long time to invent that new fire extinguisher. And you're right, it is expensive. And you made a comment there about how many more do we need, and I suppose I generalized that to say how many more can be discovered, because nobody's really sure. How many variations are there out there? I do look at the Carbex preclinical stuff and the recent WHO preclinical pipeline review, and I guess I'm encouraged that there are new things to be found. We'll see. But every one of them takes a long time to cause them to come into fruition. So I guess I'm glad we're doing what we're doing across all those various areas that you listed out. And I will say diagnostics, more work on diagnostics. You're absolutely correct. I think it has lagged behind. It's not had a voice. So I'm glad for the IMI project that is working on talking about that. I guess when I think about what Drive AB did for the world, it was created a language about new drugs. And so I'm looking for the new IMI project, Drive DX, I think is the name, to give us a language about diagnostics. You've actually must have dealt a little bit with the economics of diagnostics and thinking about the ones that you've developed. What do you think needs to be done to get diagnostics to a place where we actually use them rather than the often cheaper solution of just prescribe something so I get the patient out of my office?
I think it's a difficult balance for a clinician, because it's not just that. I mean, if you've got a patient right in front of you who's potentially septic, you want to give them as many antibiotics as possible to save their lives. Right. And I think a lot of people are very harsh on clinicians with the antimicrobial stewardship. It is a case of life or death. But if we can develop these technologies to be able to enable that to be a better decision about which antibiotic to use, that's incredibly important. However, as I said before, the antibiotic market is definitely broken economically, and I actually think the diagnostics market is too, from all the research I've done. To get something from the laboratory even into testing its pilot, and to getting all the technology together and incorporating all that technology into one unit costs a lot of money anyway. And actually, I see a lot of companies doing this because they have the funds to be able to do that, and they can access those types of resources too. But I don't see many academics doing it, because it's so much more difficult for an academic to access those types of resources unless you have companies behind you helping you and supporting you to develop these techs. But for me, again, what I would like to see is that innovation, and we see it with Apple, we see it with Tesla, and they keep innovating all the time, and we get a new phone every 6 months. That technology and that innovation is there, but why isn't it there with diagnostics? And that bothers me, because actually diagnostics in itself, I mean, the gold standard is agar culture. Still today, that's the gold standard. And when you think about it, it's like, well, that shouldn't be the case. I mean, we've got sequencing, handheld sequencers going around there with Nanopore. We've got a Tesla with their really great tech, and I wonder why. And I often say, you've got these multi-billionaires who're inventing this really, really cool tech. Why don't they diversify and go into diagnostics? Why not?
I think unlike a new mobile phone, if I decided I wanted to start inventing and selling a new mobile phone, I think I could just do that. I'm sure there's some licenses to buy and so forth, but nobody's going to tell me that I can't sell the phone that I invent. I think with medical devices and medicines, because they speak to public health, a diagnostic that only pretends to work, which is of course the problem with Theranos, is actually dangerous. And that I think is part of the hurdle of inventing new diagnostics. You look at the technology that people have thought of for new diagnostics, that's just astounding. You're using microwaves or something you talked about. I mean, Extraordinary science is now available, but proving that it does what it does in a medical sense, when the gold standard is what Alexander Fleming was using, you go, wow, that's actually an interesting puzzle. How do you sort that out and make that work? So I think it's a very diagnoses are much harder than I think people appreciate to bring a new one into being. So.
I completely agree. It's a regulation. I mean, it's that whole pipeline again: lab, spin out, testing, regulations and getting CE certified, and then proving it actually works in a patient. It's very different to proving it works in the laboratory, completely different actually. So one of the big things about diagnostics that I found is, fine, we can do in vitro kind of testing with really complex matrices like sewage or feces, but will that translate in a patient, and will we be able to detect that same target in patient feces? And that's something that I've been trying to work on for a long time. So it's about not making false claims, and it's about doing the science to make sure it is robust enough that you are, if you're putting your name to a diagnostic and you want it out there, that it actually does the job. And that's a really big thing for me. So that's why I'm taking a long time to do this. This is probably going to take me my entire career to develop this diagnostic, and probably completely out of use or not usable by then probably. But I think the point is that the reason I'm doing it is not just to help the wider thing of AMR. The reason I'm doing it is it's driven by curiosity. So I'm a scientist because I'm driven by curiosity, and if I innovate at the same time, that's a bonus. You don't choose this as a career because you want to save the world. You choose it as a career because every single day you're learning. And that's why I do it, because I'm learning every single day. And it's just amazing how much there is to learn. But it's also that same thing about bacteriophage. I think I can relate it to bacteriophage, because with phage, I feel like there's a lot of people developing companies now and making these claims that their phage work. But there are several things as a microbiologist that I've sat there and thought about and just wondered, is there enough research to be able to make those claims about phage right now? Okay, they could be, they're not a silver bullet, but they could be really useful in time. But I think that there's a dangerous narrative going around that phage is going to be the next big solution to AMR, which I don't think should be peddled, frankly.
It might be a solution. Will it be the solution? Seems unlikely. We're all rooting for phage. It certainly is. Because it's pretty. Watch the videos. It's pretty obvious that the right phage can kill the right bacteria, but there's a number of steps in connecting those two to each other so that one finishes the other one off. Well, this has been quite a tour. It's your enthusiasm is a lot of fun, and I'm delighted to see you well launched in a very productive career of being a scientist with an innate curiosity who's out there spreading the word about what she knows and how to news you can use at your life and home. I would say that is the kind of message you've been sharing locally. So superb. So what have we not covered that you want to bring up, if anything?
I don't think there's anything at the moment that we haven't covered. I think we've covered almost everything. One thing I will say is, PR is a great thing. And if you're a scientist, it's really important to put yourself out there with the right type of information and knowledge to try and make a change. And I think we've got a moral obligation as scientists to do that. So that's the reason that's why I'm here. Got a moral obligation.
Yeah, that theme about misinformation that can kill you, which is rather an extraordinary thing to think about, isn't it? Yeah.
Scary.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, it's been lovely to chat with you. Stay safe and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, John.
Well, what fun to get to visit with Tina today. Extraordinary breadth of activities and enthusiasm for public communication, and shows you what you can do as an energetic, up-and-coming scientist. Fantastic stuff. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And as always, like, comment, and subscribe for more. See you next time.